All right, class, yes, we are. We're recording. This is going to be chapter 4. And the name of this chapter is Managing Your Cash and Your Savings. That's it. Let's get into it. Let me share my screen. Got some videos to show you and everything. All right, let's get this going here. Slideshow. Click the start. All right, good stuff. Managing your cash and savings. Some of this is going to be very kind of basic, kind of self-explanatory. Most of you kind of know some of this stuff, but it's good. It's good to kind of have a little bit of background knowledge and information on some of this information. Well, hold on, I'm gonna run out of juice here. Plug in. All right, let's go. Chapter 4. Cash management. What is cash management? That's just pretty much your routine day-to-day administration of cash and liquid assets. Remember, we talked about liquid assets, liquidity. Liquidity, once again, is just essentially cash that you have, or the amount of cash that you have accessibility to. I put up on one of the videos of the liquidity ratios, which is, I think, it's a really important ratio to figure out how much liquidity you have and how much cash you have and how long it would take for you to be without cash, based on how much your current obligations or your current bills are. So cash management, just the routine day-to-day administration of cash and liquid assets. Two basic types of financial institutions. The first would be a depository institution, and then a non-depository. We'll get into both of those right now. Depository institution, that's just your run-of-the-mill, just regular bank. You see them on every street corner. You see them in every shopping mall or strip mall kind of a thing. That's just a bank or financial institution. You can make a deposit. Think of your regular banks you see on the street, the Wells Fargos, the Bank of America, and banks like Chase and those types of banks. And also there's it's called non-depository. These are businesses, institutions that offer banking services, but you cannot make deposits there. Think of like insurance companies. You can make financial transactions, but you cannot deposit cash. Insurance companies, pensions funds, securities firms, meaning financial institutions, investment bankers, investment opportunities. You can you can pay for things in cash, but you can't basically deposit the cash, and then that cash is essentially held for you to use it later. So it'd be, like I said, insurance companies, pension funds, securities firms, finance companies, and even, believe it or not, pawn shops. So how safe is your money? Let's get into it. So let's look at the Great Depression and run on banks. First, I'll show you a short little video on run on banks. Give me a second here. Let me pull it up. Oh, sorry. Let's go to where's run on banks. Here we go. I gotta get back to share screen. Okay. And here we go.
And Mark.
This is Chris and Mark have nothing to do with the run on banks.
Well, Chris is using eToro to... As mentioned in the fractional reserve banking video, only a fraction of the currency in existence is actually tangible. So paper money and coins. Let's assume
something happened there. So we'll just go with this. Once I go big screen, because sometimes it cuts off my ability to share.
As mentioned in the fractional reserve banking video, only a fraction of the currency in existence is actually tangible. So paper money and coins. Let's assume that Bank A, like any other bank, has customers who trust it with their money for various reasons. Some create bank deposits. Some simply keep some spending money in their bank accounts, and so on. These people are legally allowed to go to the bank and take their currency out in the form of paper money. The problem is that most of the currency banks manage doesn't exist physically. For the sake of our discussion, we'll assume 10% of the currency Bank A manages is tangible, and we'll also assume it actually keeps that paper money in a vault. If 2 out of 100 customers ask for physical money, the bank can handle it. But what if 20 out of 100 people do it? Naturally, the bank would become insolvent. It just doesn't have that much physical
Remember that term insolvent? We talked about that in one of our last classes. Insolvent is when basically you owe more than what you're worth.
currency. To make matters worse, the depositors would panic and spread the word, causing a bank run, which is kind of like an infection. As more people find out a bank is in trouble, they tell others, and this might make depositors stop trusting banks in general. Even seemingly healthy banks can be affected because, again, most of their money is not physical. Therefore, governments and central banks do their best to keep depositors at ease. In some places, like the US or the European Union, bank deposits are guaranteed up until a certain amount, but that is a topic for another video.
Which we'll get into shortly. So there you go. So it's like, so banks generally, there's a percentage. Sometimes it's about, they only have to keep about, what's it, 10% on hand of what they should have in cash, and that doesn't have to be in each location. It's going to be basically just spread out amongst their locations. So let's get back into this. All right, now we're going to get into the run on the banks, or the Great Depression. Let me see if I'm stopped. Let me share it now. It's about a 10-minute video. Let me see if it'll, oh, yeah, I'm sharing screen, good. This gets into the 1929 stock market, the Wall Street stock market crash. So you have a little bit of better understanding of what happened there when the stock market crashed and there was a run on the banks at the same time.
We're not really going to have to pay for it. Now, of course, that didn't turn out to be true. You could see the crash. Why do you think they called it the crash? I mean, it's really an airborne collapse metaphor. You can't crash if you're never left the ground. And it's not like a crack up where you're on the ground and you collide into something else. Rather, it's, the plane fell.
The 20s had been so prosperous in so many places, not in the countryside. The farming industry was in very bad shape in the 1920s, but certainly in the cities, it was very prosperous. People were making fortunes on the stock market. And then all of a sudden, poof, it went. I mean, economists, very serious economists, had been saying that we'd reached a new level, a new plateau of prosperity in this country, and we were never going to go back. And then the crash happened.
All through the summer of 1929, there had been ominous rumblings. For months, unemployment had been rising. Automobile sales and department store revenues had fallen off sharply. Across the South and West, farms were failing in record numbers. And still on Wall Street, the delirious optimism continued, undimmed. On August 27, 1929, the Dow Jones average reached its all-time peak as an army of frenzied buyers descended on New York, desperate not to miss a single day's trading, swamping the hotels, camping out on the street in front of the stock exchange, and in the tiny graveyard of Trinity Church on Broadway, where Alexander Hamilton lay buried.
What caused the crash of 29 was excess speculation. What had happened was that the American economy as a whole had begun to cool starting in 1928. And the Wall Street economy disconnected from the underlying real economy and became a speculative bubble. And this fueled the speculation that just took off and took off and took off until, again, one day, somebody woke up and said, this has gone too far. There's an old story about Bernard Baruch, that he had his shoes shined every morning by the same shoe shine boy. And one morning, the shoe shine boy gave him a stock tip. And Baruch went to his office, called up his broker, and said, sell me out. And shoe shine boys are giving stock tips. It's time to get out.
As summer turned to fall, the mood changed. As the stock market dipped, then rose, then lurched downwards again, investors grew increasingly uneasy. In September, an economist named Roger Babson sent a wave of fear rippling through Wall Street when he warned that sooner or later, a crash is coming, and it may be terrific. but most experts brushed away any concerns. Stock prices, one man declared, have reached what looks like a permanently high plateau. And then the bottom fell out.
Look at it. No traffic in New York.
On Wednesday, October 23rd, 1929, the first waves of panicky selling began to drive down the price of blue chip stocks, like Westinghouse and General Electric. The following morning,
We'll get into later what really determines like the value of stocks. And so this once you piece this together, the future lesson, it'll make more sense.
the fear turned to panic, and brokers began unloading margin accounts at record speed. Stock prices plummeted sickeningly across the board, spurring the rush of sell orders from terrified speculators still more. As anguished shrieks rose up from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the visitors' gallery was cleared. In less than 2 hours, nearly $10 billion invested in stocks was simply wiped out.
So you see, people got panicked. They started selling off their stocks, taking out essentially cash.
Outside on the street, crowds massed 6 deep in front of the stock exchange, while hundreds more stood in shocked silence on the steps of Federal Hall. Newspapers would later try to describe the uncanny murmuring sound that echoed off the stone facades of the financial district that morning. It was a collective moan of horror and grief, and stunned disbelief, rising up from thousands of ruined, frightened men. The biggest crowds gathered outside the House of Morgan, desperately hoping for a miracle. Cheers broke out when word came that a consortium of bankers had agreed to pump hundreds of millions of dollars into the stock exchange to shore up the faltering market. Word spread that once again, the day had been saved by the House of Morgan.
Which is JP Morgan.
But the day had not been saved. On Friday, with the market apparently stabilized, the banks withdrew their funds. The following Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, known forever after as Black Tuesday, another tidal wave of selling hit the exchange. And this time, no one came to the rescue.
See, people just did not have confidence in the stock market and the market. So like, I don't want to have my money, my investments tied up into a volatile stock market. I want to sell off, and I just want to have the money, the cash. They're going to take that asset and turn it into cash or into liquidity. But when that happens, what's going to happen is that you're going to really take out the value of companies, which can be a bad thing.
Nothing could stop it. Just people wanted out. And this was in the fall. Most crashes tend to be in the fall. And I think that, again, it's human psychology. You tend to be more cautious in the fall. I mean, the speculations of summer that seem so brilliant, suddenly when the chill winds of October come, you wonder if there's such a good idea and you try to get out. Too many people do that at once that it causes the market to drop, which causes more people to want to get out. And suddenly, the snowball rolls down the hill.
Hour after hour, the market continued its descent into chaos and pandemonium as stock prices simply collapsed under the torrent of panicked selling. And desperate brokers fought and screamed and trampled one another to get out.
16 million shares traded that day, which seems like nothing today because we trade 16 million shares in the first 5 seconds of the business day. But the trading record set on the day of the crash, the 16 million shares, was not vested until 1969. It was 40 years before the New York Stock Exchange traded more shares than it traded on the day of the crash. The tickers did not stop running until 7:45, when the market had closed at 3:30, I guess.
In the worst single day in the history of the New York Stock Exchange, the market lost $14 billion in value, bringing the week's loss to more than $30 billion, 10 times more than the entire annual budget of the federal government, and far more than the United States had spent during all of World War I. Worst hit in the short run were the thousands of small investors who, believing that everyone could be rich, had bought stock on margin, sometimes borrowing as much as 90% of its book value. In a matter of hours, in some cases minutes, they had lost everything. Their life savings, their houses, and their dreams.
So when people lose all of their money that's tied up in their investments, what's the next logical thing they're going to do? They're going to try to get the cash that they have in banks, in the cash that they have, the liquidity they have in their banks, and pull that out.
Financiers who had not been wiped out tried to put a brave face on things, insisting there was no cause for alarm. Prudent investors are now buying stocks in huge quantities, John Jacob Raskob told the New York Times, and will profit handsomely when this hysteria is over.
Wednesday, October 30th, 1929. Mr. Raskob was asked if he believed that the decline in the stock market would have great effects on business. He answered that he did not believe the effects would be other than temporary, lasting probably 2 or 3 months, and that he did not believe that the effects would be drastic in other than luxury industries. The New York Times.
That's why it's important, as we've talked about a little bit with budgets, and that one budget scenario, and having, I hear the cop cars in the background there. They're coming for me. My ride's here. But it's good. That's why you need to have that 6 months savings, emergency savings.
But others feared the worst. The present week, one newspaper editor declared, has witnessed the greatest stock market catastrophe of all times. It would take a decade and a half for the American economy to fully recover.
I think the reason the crash lives on in the American folk memory, although there aren't many people alive today who were adults when the crash happened in almost 70 years ago now, but what followed the crash, the Great Depression, which permanently scarred the American psyche, and we remember the crash as the beginning of the Great Depression, although in fact the two had nothing to do with each other, or very little. But that's why I think the crash became such a benchmark, because it was this very sharp line between the prosperity of the giddy cocktail party of the 1920s and the awful depression of the 1930s, and the bread lines and the apple sellers and the bonus riots and what have you.
That sense of
All right, so it's good little background details about the stock market crash, how it's connected to banks, liquidity, and then the run on banks. All right, let's get back to the slides here. Okay, FDIC, that leads me to the next little video here that I have. Let's go here. So now we have to make sure that, as you know, as the government, that we have safeguards in place. It's going to keep your money safe in the bank, so that people, when they lose a bunch of money in the stock market, they lose all their investments in the stock market, they're going to turn around and go to the banks and take their money out, make sure that their money is protected and secured in the bank. So let's go here. I can't share that, so I am sorry. Let's just go here. All right, let's just do it this way.
There are few ironclad guarantees in life, but
This is about the FDIC.
here's one. Federal Deposit Insurance. Americans have counted on it since 1934. In those days, the insured deposit limit was just $2,500. Today, it's 100 times that. But the promise is the same. Whenever you put money into FDIC insured deposit accounts and stay within coverage limits, that money is 100% protected, no matter what happens to the bank or the economy. That's some guarantee to keep for more than 75 years. Here's how the FDIC is able to do it. Deposit insurance is exactly that, insurance. But unlike an auto or home policy, the consumer doesn't pay the premiums. Banks and savings institutions do. The
Premiums. We'll get into premiums later. Premiums is just a fancy word for a payment. Okay. So you don't really have to pay to have your money insured by the FDIC.
FDIC is funded by the banking industry, not taxpayer money. The premiums go into the Deposit Insurance Fund. And as with any insurance, the higher the risk, the higher the premium.
Remember, we talked a little bit about insurance. Insurance, the big word with insurance is indemnification. And that just basically means to make you whole. And so you are made whole up to $250,000 per signer per account.
But what
I'll get into that a little bit later too.
happens in times when bank failures are high and the fund is frequently tapped to protect depositors? There have been times when the fund has had a negative balance, even when it had abundant resources. The FDIC is required to set aside a contingent reserve for probable failures over the next 12 months. The higher the projected failures, the greater that reserve must be. Since the FDIC is not allowed to offset that cost by future income, the net result on paper is a negative fund balance, even though total resources are positive. But whatever the fund balance, it does not affect the FDIC's ability to protect depositors when banks fail. The FDIC has access to considerable cash from many sources. Besides the money currently in the Deposit Insurance Fund, the FDIC receives quarterly premiums from the banking industry. It can also assess banks special fees and require them to pay premiums in advance. Then there are the unsold assets from failed banks. As these are sold, the proceeds are converted to cash. In 2009, the FDIC collected $10.2 billion in regular assessment revenues, plus another $5.6 billion in a special assessment. And at the end of the year, it required
It gets a little wonky, a little overly detailed, but it's okay.
insured institutions to prepay 3 years worth of insurance premiums. That raised another $46 billion. Based on current projections, the amount on hand will be more than sufficient to handle bank failures from the financial crisis that began in 2008. The FDIC is committed to doing everything possible to be solely funded by the banking industry and would only seek public funds as a last resort. In such an unlikely event, the FDIC has a $100 billion line of credit with the U.S. Treasury. And then there's the ultimate reassurance. The FDIC is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. No matter what the future brings, the FDIC will continue to be a symbol of confidence for America's banking public.
There you go, a little bit about the FDIC. All I wanted you to get out of that is that they will ensure and make sure that your money is safe in the bank up to $250,000 per person or per account per signer. So let's say you've got, you have $500,000 in the bank. You have put you and your wife on there as signers. That means it's insured up to $500,000. If you have more than that, does that mean it's not insured? Technically, yes, but how much should you really have in the bank? You shouldn't have that much just sitting in the bank. You should have those in other vehicles, other investments. All right, let's go back to slideshow. Play from the current slide. Good. Checking accounts, super simple stuff. Also known as a demand deposit. That'll probably show up on a quiz, meaning that the bank must permit deposited funds to be withdrawn by the account holder. It means that you can go in and you can demand, you can put on a deposit, it's a demand deposit, and you can demand it back whenever you want. But with the check, sometimes it takes time for that check to clear, before those funds are available. Savings accounts, those are basically, that's known as a time deposit, since they should remain on deposit for a longer time than a demand deposit / checking account. So it's a little bit different than a checking account, similar, but a little bit different. So instead of a demand deposit, it's called a time deposit, which means it should, in theory, be in your account a little bit longer. Of course, you can do transfers back and forth. Interest paying checking accounts. Those are called our NOW accounts, stands for our negotiable order of withdrawal. And our checking accounts, the bank pays interest, not that much anymore, usually have minimum balance requirements. So if you have to have a certain balance in it for that account, and then once you keep those balances up to a certain amount, not as readily available now because the interest rates are so low as at the time I'm recording this. So, but it wasn't uncommon to have a checking account where you can get paid interest. So let's say you have $10,000 in there, and you get 5% interest, and you make 5% on that 10,000. Money market deposit accounts. These are just another interest earning checking accounts, but there are limitations on the amount of monthly withdrawal checks written. You can only write, I want to say maybe some of these accounts are different. You might only be able to make 5 withdrawals, 10 withdrawals a month, because they don't want you to use this as your normal checking account. So it's usually something that is added onto if you have like a decent investment portfolio. We'll get into what portfolios are later. You can sometimes have a money market deposit account set up as well. So it's kind of a way for that company that you have a lot of investments in stocks and bonds, say, we'll set you up with a money market account. But there's some limitations with that you can only pay only a certain amount of checks can be taken out. Sometimes it's not a bad idea to have some of your big ticket items taken out while you're earning interest as well. Money market mutual funds. This is basically, we'll get into mutual funds later, but that's just, your money is pooled with many small investors. That gets into mutual funds. We get into mutual funds and ETFs and, stocks and bonds and everything much later in the class. But you can get a higher return than a savings account, but you have withdrawals, and checks have to be in predetermined amounts. So you can't say, oh, I need to make a withdrawal, to cover my, my insurance, my car insurance, which is coming up, which is $218.42. No, those are generally predetermined amounts, and just generally nice round numbers like a 500 or 1,000. This is interesting, called an asset management account. It's similar to a money market account, which would have been here and here, but these usually require a higher balance and is a banking and investment account tied together. So let's say kind of similar to this one here, but it's tied together. So let's say you have all of your money, you have a ton of money in investments. You have a lot of money in investments. And by the way, like I've said in this class, don't money shame yourself. Think, oh my gosh, I'm not even close to being there. These are just things to think about. Your banking and investments accounts tied together. It's connected with other investment tools that are swept at the end or beginning of a month, depending upon how you set that up, to the account holder's liking. So you can say, okay, I'm going to have all these, I'm going to have my house payment come out, my car payment come out, boom, 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 certain amount of things come in there. And then at the end, and then that money from your big investment is here. You have your money for all your bills. That money is swept out, but then hopefully you're making that up in some profits in your investments as you go. Electronic banking services, pretty basic stuff, EFTs, electronic funds transfer systems, electronic transfers, direct deposits. Technically, it's part of your money management and banking. Debit cards, automated teller machines. We all know this stuff. I don't think I need to go over it with you. My sister she's my sister. She's 54. Only a few years ago, she started using an ATM card, which is crazy. And believe it or not, so these are considered electronic banking services. Before debit cards and ATM machines, you literally had to plan out your weekend because the banks were closed on Saturdays and Sundays, and there were no ATM machines. So you had to plan out your weekend and think, okay, how much cash do I need to get me through the weekend? That was very common. I'm 49 at the time of taping this, and it was very common just when I was growing up in my teen. Actually, the ATMs came in right when I was towards the tail end of high school, but I remember my parents thinking, so, okay, how much money do I need? How much cash do I need for the weekend? So it was interesting. And that's actually a really good point. And when we talked about budgets a little bit, I think I got into this in the budget video, that a good habit of getting into is having cash on you so that you have your miscellaneous expenses. which can beat you up and kill you as is in the budget video. If you have that cash on you, that cash is more tangible and you're less likely to overspend with cash, because your stupid debit card, it doesn't seem real. You can just pull that out, just pay. If you have cash on you, then you can really look at, okay, here's how much cash I have to get me through the week for these type of expenses. It's a really good habit to get into. Checking accounts, basically could be individual or joint checking accounts. Individuals, like most of you probably start off with the individual account. Actually, somebody might start off with a joint account, like with a, co-signer or family member, and then you can transition into an individual. Or my wife, it's our married couple, is my wife and I, we have a joint checking account. General checking account procedures: always write checks in ink. If I was to poll all of you in this class, how many of you know how to write a check? I bet you probably 10% of you would. That's okay. That's normal. If we were in person, I would do like a check writing exercise for you. But always make sure that you include the name of the person being paid, the date, and the amount of the check written in both numeral and words for accuracy. So you're going to write it like in that little box, the numbers, and then you're going to write it out in numbers. 50 is always a tough one to spell out. And I'm sure the banks have seen every misspelling of every type of enumeration, I guess you could say. Sign the check the same way as on the signature card when you open the account at the bank. And then note the check's purpose in the lower left corner. You don't have to always write it. I mean, it's a good idea. I remember one time I had an employee and she said, I said, do you want any special notes on your paycheck? And she says, just write, how about just something inspirational? So I'm like, all right, you got it. So literally on her check, I just said the words something inspirational. Catch Me If You Can. This is good stuff here. There's that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio called Catch Me If You Can. It's a true story about this guy, Frank Abagnale. He wrote this great book called To Catch a Thief, The Art of the Steal. That was it, The Art of the Steal. And how he kind of conned his way through life. And it's really kind of a cautionary tale. But here's something he talks about, how it still is easy to do fraudulent checks. I've been a victim of fraudulent checks too. So let me pull this video up. Give me just a moment, as my Italian friends say. Okay. Let's do, sorry. Here is Frank Abagnale.
Your husband, I got to pay the phone bill.
Sorry,
to work, and this morning you said to your husband, I got to pay the phone bill. And you stuck it in the mailbox, you put the flag up. You went to work, he went to work.
Does this happen as much as it used to? Absolutely not, but it's still good to know this, and still good to know to buy the pen he's talking about.
Work, kids went to school, they drive to subdivision and go, flag up on this ranch house on the left, check it out. A guy paid his Verizon phone bill, take it. They go home, open it, and sure enough, you got a check in there to Verizon, $128. God forbid, off your money market account. I basically, for argument's sake, Q-Tex nail polish.
Why would he say God forbid off your money market account? The reason he would say that, if that is tied to your money market account, then that has a higher balance. You have more money in that account. And why is that important? You'll see. Because there's more money he can make this fraudulent check for, as opposed to probably just a regular checking account.
Remover. So I take your check, I put a piece of Scotch tape over your signature, turn it upside down, $128. God forbid, off your money market account. I basically, for argument's sake, Q-Tex nail polish remover. So I take your check, I put a piece of Scotch tape over your signature, turn it upside down, put a piece of Scotch tape on the back where your signature had appeared on the front, lay it in a cake pan, get the Q-Tex nail polish remover, pour the whole bottle over the check. And of course, the check floats to the bottom. Check at the top is written with a $250 Mont Blanc roller ball. The one at the bottom is written with a $150 cross ballpoint. They're sitting in Q-Tex nail polish remover, which is 99.1% acetone. Acetone is a chemical that removes from paper any ink that's not the printer's base ink. So anything you type, laser printed, jet printed, matrix printed, ballpoint, flare pen, gel pen, gone. 15 minutes later, I just take another picture, shake the pan a little bit, and 15 minutes later, I pull out a blank check. I blow dry with a blow dryer. I put it in a book overnight so it dries flat and stable with no wrinkles. In the morning, I take it out, remove the Scotch tape, and have a blank signed check from you. And off I go. That's simple. So today, unfortunately, we're buying checks through the mail for $9 for 200 checks, 99 cents for 200 checks. You're not going to have anything but blank white paper. That's all that check is. If you go to the bank and buy a check, you're paying $18 approximately for 200 checks that come from their check printer. It is bleach sensitive, but that's it, to bleach. Not 21 chemical sensitive. It would be cost prohibitive at that price. So I would only ask you to do what I do. I could carry a $250 Mont Blanc, but instead I carry this pen, the pen they gave you one. It's called a Uniball 207. It's the only pen in the world that when you write with it, it's permanent.
Remember that Uniball 207.
For the lifetime of the piece of paper that it's written on. This is not water-based or dye-based, it's pigment ink. So it doesn't not only write smoothly, but when you write with it, if you were signing Frank Abagnale, as you write the F, it's permanent for a lifetime. There's no chemical on the face of the earth that can remove it. $2, sold anywhere. The bank gave you one as a tool. So if you write checks off a 3-page checkbook, or you have to sign something, you are selling a car, you write down the mileage, you don't want to change, that's the pen you want to use. You sign or you use this pen. $2 and you eliminate any risk of having your checks washed and having them altered by someone. It's called the Uniball 207. They're sold at drugstores, grocery stores, you name it, around the world, and a great tool.
All right, I'm gonna watch this next video here. I haven't watched this, but I'm pretty sure I know where he's going with this from his book, of which shredder is more secure.
You need to shred. A shredder is a wonderful thing because everything that you think is worthless is of value to someone else. Here's the problem. You saw an ad on TV, a guy was stealing a garbage bag out of a condo, and it told you to buy the shredder, so you ran down the store and bought it. The fact is there are 3 shredders. There are straight shredders called ribbon shredders, and they cut paper straight. At the FBI lab, we can put back a ribbon shredder in less than an hour and bring that bank statement to a federal judge for an indictment. And we won't miss a decimal point in the statement. So that would be a worthless piece of equipment. There are some of you go out and buy a crisscross shredder called the diamond cut shredder. Much better, but we can put back a document from a diamond cut shredder in about 8 hours at the lab, like a bank statement, as we did in Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, Arthur Andersen, and put it back into court for evidence after it had been shredded. So again, you wasted your money. When you buy a shredder, since they're all the same price, obviously buy one that does what you want it to accomplish, and that is to destroy whatever it is you're trying to destroy. And that, of course, is a micro-cut shredder. Now, a micro-cut shredder cuts paper into confetti, so it is absolutely impossible to put back together. This is the part I don't understand. You go to Office Depot, Staples, Office Max, they've taken 3 shredders, all 3 of them, out of a box and put them on display, and they plugged them in, and they put a stack of paper there so you could try them out. So you went to the first one and it cut long strips like this. Then you went to the second one and shorter strip, and the other one confetti. Which one are you going to pick? Obviously the one that's confetti. If you put a credit card in a crisscross shredder, the cutter is only capable of slicing the card in 4 even slices. So if I empty the garbage bag, take the 4 slices out, put them on top of a desk, push them together, I have everything. Your name, your credit card number, your expiration date, your security code, your signature. But if you put it in a micro-cut shredder, it turns it into confetti. Every FBI office in America only uses micro-cut shredders, obviously. And because they're all the same price, that's what you need to buy. Whose makes it is irrelevant. You want to make sure it says security micro-cut shredder. And that's the kind of shredder you want to use to obviously do what you want to do.
Micro-cut shredder. He actually, in his book, he wrote about another good tip is when you're going to shred, if you don't have a shredder, would be you take, let's say you have an envelope, if you get some credit offer or something in the mail, you take it, you rip it up, and you rip it one way, you rip it the other way, and then you put one stack over here, another stack over here, and you put one stack of that in one trash can, you another stack in another trash can. So if somebody's gonna go through the trash, they're not gonna have all of the information. So that's the simplest way to shred things if you don't buy a shredder. Overdraft, that's just, when you're writing a check for an amount greater than the current account balance. So you write a check for, or you have a check, or you have a withdrawal coming out for $200, you only have $150 in your account, you have overdrafted your account. And you will probably get hit, or you should get hit with an overdraft fee. Wells Fargo used to be infamous for this. They would give you a $35 overdraft fee. Next day, if you don't have it, another $35, another $35. They would just keep hitting you, and then it ended up hurting more people with less means. And they have since changed a lot of those rules and regulations about overdrafts. Stop payment. That's when service or good was defective or faulty. You can order a stop payment with the bank on a check. There's usually a fee associated with it. So let's say, for example, you got some deal. You have a house and you have a contractor who's gonna come over and he's gonna, do your flooring or drywall, let's say flooring, and then you're going to write him a check, and then you write him the check and it's $6,000, and then you realize that he has not finished the job is subpar. You can tell him, say, hey, listen, you need to come and you need to fix this before you cash that check, and he just blows you off. You can contact the bank before the check clears and you say, can you put a stop payment on that check? You'll get charged for it, and then basically that check is not good anymore. Okay. Then you just have to work out something with, like, for example, with that contractor, and then, once the job is done or completed, then you can, write them another check, but you can do stop payments for checks. Account reconciliation. What's that? That's just balancing your checkbook. Most people don't do that anymore. They let their apps. People don't even really do this anymore. My grandfather, the first time I got a checking account, he had pride and sitting me down and show me how to balance my checkbook. When I had businesses in the past, I would, have to reconcile my checking account at the end of the month, just make sure everything was there. And you get these balloons on your screen that you balanced it down to the penny, which was always kind of fun. Special types of checks. Something called a cashier's check. That's basically you give the money to the bank issues you a check on your behalf to whatever party you wish. The cashier's check will always be guaranteed. So basically it's a check from the bank, not a check directly from you. So that's basically it has the name of the person who's supposed to receive the check. Sometimes cashier's check, like let's say we're in a situation and I am working, I consistently owe you money. I have to pay you money, right? Let's say I'm renting a house for you, right? And I start bouncing you checks. I write you a check. It's well within your right to say, can you give me a cashier's check instead? So then I would go to the bank, and then let's say my rent is $2,300 a month or $2,200, whatever it says, say $2,200 a month. Then I would make sure that I had $2,200 in my account, and then I have a cashier's check written to you from the bank. So then, as far as the bank, you, the landlord, is concerned, I paid my rent. I get credit for it. The money was taken out of the bank. Generally used by people without checking accounts, not always, or requested by intended parties to guarantee the check is valid. More of a guarantee from the bank. Traveler's checks. These used to be more popular than they are now. Usually, if you were going to go on vacation before everybody can use ATMs, your ATM cards everywhere, you would go and get just a book of traveler's checks. What that was is you literally get a book of traveler's checks and give me $250 book of traveler's checks, and there would be 10 $25 traveler's checks in there, so that when you get to your destination, you can say, and you want to buy something, this is basically cash, 25 American dollars, and you can basically pay with that. But checks sold by large financial institutions, and there is a fee attached to it, 1% to 2%, for fixed denominations of between $20 and $100, used as currency throughout the world. Certified check. That's just basically a personal check that the bank certifies to guarantee the funds are available. Similar to a cashier's check. That's kind of like a brother or cousin of it. This is a guarantee for you more than the bank. Somebody will give you a certified check. Compounding interest. We'll get into compounding interest some more when we start getting into investments. But that's just, the interest earned in each subsequent period determined by applying the stated or nominal rate of interest earned in each prior period. That sounds like a lot and it might not make sense, but once we get into investments and compounding interest, which is an incredibly important concept, it will make more sense. Simple interest, this is interest that is only paid on the initial amount of the deposit. So if you say you had compounding interest, that means that interest is paid, which is basically an additional percentage of the money or the funds in an account. It keeps growing period after period. That period could be a month, could be a quarter, generally a month, could be a year. Simple interest is when it's just that interest is paid just one time when you make the deposit. Nominal stated rate of interest, the promised rate of interest paid on a savings deposit or charged on a loan. You don't get a lot paid on savings deposits right now, like for reasons we discussed before. And charged on a loan, this is more applicable when we get to the into the chapter talking about like buying a car. Effective rate of interest, that's the annual rate of return that is actually earned or charged during the period the funds are held or borrowed. Once again, we'll get more into this when we go into car buying. That's it. All right, that was it. That was chapter 4. That was, where am I? I can't see myself now. Any questions? You can just email me at dussere@chapman.edu. You can email me my citrus, which is jdussere@citruscollege.edu. Aside from that, next up will be chapter 5. All right, take care.